Okay, here we go. This is me working on my speech impediment and reading some fan fiction. I wrote this one in 2010 because something happened in my town. It's called The Butterfly. In Memoriam, Edith Keeler. Oh, this was published in the New York Times, March 1st, 1930. In Memoriam, Edith Keeler, 1901 to 1930. It is with deep sorrow that we announce the untimely passing of Edith Keeler, a beacon of hope and compassion, whose dedication to her fellow man left an indelible mark on the city. Miss Keeler, aged 29, passed away on February 23, 1930, following a tragic traffic accident in New York City. She was struck by an automobile while crossing the street near the 21st Century Mission, the very place she had devoted her heart and soul to improving. Edith Keeler was born in 1901, dedicated her life to uplifting the downtrodden. She was known for her tireless work at the 21st Century Street Mission, where she provided meals, shelter, and hope for those struggling during these difficult times. Ms. Keeler was an advocate for peace, believing deeply in a brighter future where compassion would prevail over conflict. Her vision for a kinder, more just society inspired those around her to live with greater empathy and purpose. Friends and neighbors described Ms. Keeler as a radiant presence, an individual with a rare blend of strength and gentleness. She spoke often of a world free from violence, a place where people of love and understanding could heal even in their deepest divides. Her speeches at the mission drew crowds of people who found solace in their words, and her efforts to help others went far beyond words. She was known to give herself selflessly, whether by sharing her last dollar or staying up through the night to comfort those in need. The loss of Edith Keeler is felt keenly by all those who knew her. The 21st Street Mission will continue its work in her honor, striving to fulfill the dream she so passionately believed in. A dream of a future where no one is left behind, and where every person has the opportunity to live with a life with dignity. Edith is survived by her friends at the mission and the countless individuals whose lives she touched. Her legacy will live on in the acts of kindness she inspired in others. A memorial service will be held at the 21st Street Mission on March 5th, where those whose lives were changed by her grace and compassion may gather to celebrate her life and her vision for a better world. The funeral of Edith Keeler, 1930. The same day, by the way. The morning dawned gray and somber, a sky heavy with clouds that cast muted shadows over the streets of New York. It was 1930, and the city wore its sorrow openly in the depths of the Great Depression. Buildings loomed over the Mission District, a place of hard work and harder lives, lying unusually still, as if the city itself felt the weight of the day. Here, amidst the worn brick walls and narrow alleys, people from every corner of the district gathered, drawn together by a shared loss. They had come to honor Edith Keeler, a woman who had given them hope in the time that they had none. A Salvation Army band led the way down the street, their slow, mournful strains echoing off buildings, filling the cold morning air with the ache of brass and drums. The procession began to form, growing as it moved forward. Men in worn-out jackets and flat caps, women and children bundled in threadbare coats, a handful of young men and women stirred by Edith's vision, all joined in the march. This wasn't a formal parade. It was a communal outpouring of love and respect. People who had little to give had come to honor the woman who had given everything she had to them. At the head of this procession stood Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, known for his fierce dedication to the people of New York, especially its most vulnerable. Today, though, his voice was soft, touched with grief and usual fiery demeanor that had given way to something gentler, as though he too felt the personal weight of Edith's passing. He took a step forward and addressed the crowd, his voice carrying through the silence. "Today," he began, his tone hushed and reverent, "we say goodbye not only to Edith Keeler, but to a light in our darkest hours. Edith wasn't just a figure in the city. She was its heart, its compassion. She saw us at our lowest and loved us still. She gave us dignity when the world would not." The crowd listened in silence, as each person absorbed in their memories of Edith. She had been more than a neighbor, more than a caretaker of a humble shelter. She had been a lifeline, a friend of those whom society had cast aside. For many, she was not only a source of kindness, they had known her as a presence that lifted them from despair, if only for a moment. LaGuardia's voice was steady, but filled with emotion as he continued. She dreamed of a better world than this one, a world where no one would be left hungry or homeless. Edith Keeler didn't just talk about change, she embodied it. She gave her life to this city, not for fame or reward, but because she believed in us, in each of us. The air grew heavy with quiet sorrow. Some of the crowd clutched flowers. Others held back tears, tossing heads bowed in reverence. LaGuardia's words spoke for all of them, capturing the profound loss they felt. Edith had been a mother to the motherless, a friend to the outcast, a symbol of hope in the world that had nearly forgotten it. She had looked into the faces of the forgotten and had seen their humanity, believing in them when no one else did. As the mayor spoke, his voice strengthened, carrying conviction that touched even those standing at the very back of the gathering. Edith Keeler showed us kindness is not a luxury, but a necessity. That compassion isn't reserved for the fortunate. It is the right of every human being. Her life was a testament to the idea that we can and must be better to each other. He paused, lowering his gaze to the simple wooden casket before him. In the moment of silence, the crowd began to feel the weight of his words and the truth of Edith's legacy. The bells of a nearby church began to toll, each chime. Let's see here. I lost my place. Each chime marking the end of her journey, but not the end of her kindness, of her impact. For these people, Edith Keeler would live on in a symbol of resilience and kindness, even as the memory of her faded over the years. In that back row, nearly hidden from view, stood a small group of strangers. Dressed in plain but distinctly 1930s attire, they blended seamlessly into the crowd. Yet there was a quiet intensity in their eyes, a depth of understanding that set them apart. Captain James T. Kirk wore a wool suit and a fedora, his usual command softened by solemn speech impediment of the moment. Beside him, Spock's gaze was steady, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Dr. Leonard McCoy stood nearby, his tie slightly askew, a faint sadness in his eyes as he listened to the eulogy. They were witnesses to a moment that history would never forget, that history would forget, but that they would carry with them forever. Here in the heart of Depression-era New York, they saw the true spirit of humanity, not in the grand gestures of the powerful, but in the quiet, unwavering compassion of a single woman. Edith Keeler had been a force for good, her impact extending beyond her small shelter, her simple mission. She had touched lives in ways that transcended time, creating ripples that would resonate far into the future. As the final notes of the band faded and the crowd began to disperse, the crew of the Enterprise remained still, each lost in their own reflections. They had seen wonders across galaxies, but here in the humble city street, they had witnessed something equally profound, a testament to the power of compassion, the quiet heroism of an ordinary life. Edith Keeler, with no wealth or status, had moved the hearts of an entire city, her legacy as enduring as the stars they navigated. Standing beside Kirk and McCoy, Spock quietly lifted the small device, barely noticeable to anyone nearby. With a discreet flick of his finger, he completed a perfect holographic recording of the entire funeral, a complete living memory preserved in every detail. When he caught Kirk's questioning look, he nodded, his eyes reflecting something deeper than logic, something Kirk recognized immediately as respect. "Captain," Spock said, his voice low, "I believe it would be prudent at this moment for this moment to be remembered, not only by us, but by others who seek to understand humanity's potential." Kirk nodded, understanding the importance. "To remember not just Edith Keeler," he murmured, "but the power of one's heart to change lives around her. That's what makes us who we are, Spock. Not technology, not power, but the greatness of our hearts." Dr. McCoy, uncharacteristically solemn, added, "She didn't just give people hope. She reminded them that they were worth something, that they mattered. It's times like these that kind of person shouldn't be forgotten." Spock inclined his head, as if in agreement. "I will upload this record in..." Spock inclined his head, as if in agreement. "I will upload this record into the ship's memory banks, Captain. Memory Alpha will receive a copy as well, preserved for future generations. And the Guardian of Forever shall retain its own record of this event, so that Edith Keeler's compassion and vision are never lost to the void of time." Kirk placed a hand on Spock's shoulder, offering a rare smile. "Thank you, Spock. People need to remember that true greatness lies not only in grand achievements, but in how deeply we care for each other." The hologram would capture everything. The mournful strains of the Salvation Army Band, the quiet dignity of the gathered crowd, LaGuardier's voice honoring Edith's compassion and conviction, the rough, worn faces of the people who loved her, and standing amidst them all, 3 quiet witnesses from the distant future. As they returned to the Enterprise, they knew that this memory would live on, shared across generations, immortalized in Memory Alpha, and guarded by a timeless gaze of the Guardian of Forever. They would serve as a lesson for those who studied it, a reminder that the true greatness is often measured not by fame or power, but by the lives we touch and the love we leave behind. Long after they had returned to the stars, Edith Keeler's legacy would endure, a story of resilience, hope, and compassion, forever recorded and shared. A light for all those who would come after her, guiding them to remember the greatness of their own hearts. Part 3. The Memory of Edith Keeler. Stardate 49011.4, September 2372. The sun had begun its slow descent over New Orleans, casting warm hues across the streets as Admiral Leonard McCoy walked down towards Joseph Sisko's restaurant. McCoy's steps were slow, almost reverent. Tonight was a celebration of sorts. It was Data's first birthday with emotions, a milestone few had thought possible for an android. McCoy had promised Data he'd meet him here, and carried a gift with him, one he believed that would mean more than any material trinket. It was a memory of someone who had left a mark on McCoy's heart and who he was determined would never be forgotten. McCoy had thought long about where to meet Data. Sisko's restaurant was a natural choice, a place where people gathered to eat and to remember and care for each other, a place where even the simplest meal would become a gift. Joseph Sisko's kitchen held a quiet warmth that McCoy knew Edith Keeler would have loved. Like Edith, Joseph was a person who understood that feeding people was more than sustenance. It was community, family, and love. Inside, the restaurant was bustling with patrons, laughing with conversation filling the air as Joseph moved through the tables. His easy laugh reaching even the back of the room. When McCoy spotted Data at the window, he couldn't help marvel at how much he'd grown emotionally and otherwise, which is funny because Data doesn't grow physically, he grows emotionally. Data sat with quiet poise, his eyes moving over the room with an expression that was a blend of fascination and newfound understanding. An android learning to feel the world as humans did. Admiral, Data greeted him, standing as McCoy approached. Sit down, Data, McCoy chuckled, taking the seat across from him. I thought we agreed. You call me Leonard. Of course, Leonard, Data replied with a nod, a faint smile on his lips. They settled in, but with a warm aroma of Joseph's gumbo and the hum of jazz in the background, McCoy studied Data for a moment, watching the way he absorbed everything around him. The music, the laughter, the smells. The emotionship had been a gift, certainly, but McCoy knew sometimes overwhelming. Data, I hear you got a birthday coming up, McCoy said with a faint smile. I wanted to bring you a gift, something meaningful. Data's head tilted slightly, his curiosity evident. I am honored, Leonard. I understand that birthdays often entail exchange of symbolic items meant to convey appreciation or emotional significance. I assume by now someone has given Data a present, so I'd probably remove that line again. Well, you're in for a treat, McCoy replied. He leaned in, his voice low. What I'm giving you, Data, isn't just a story, it's an experience. It's a memory, one that's been preserved in Starfleet's archives thanks to a mutual friend. Data looked intrigued, his golden eyes alight. An experience of what, Leonard? McCoy reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small rectangular hollow recorder. This is the recording of Edith Keeler's funeral. I'm sure you've heard the name. Data nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I've read about Edith Keeler in the Federation archives and studied her pivotal role she played in the history of the Federation. Her ideas of peace were seen as both inspirational and ultimately tragically necessary. McCoy's face softened, touched with memory. Edith Keeler was more than just a necessary figure, Data. She was the kind of soul who believed in serving others. She gave me no other hope. She gave me hope when I didn't have any, back when I was just a lost, fevered doctor with nowhere to go. She cared for me. I promised myself then that I'd remember her, that she'd never be forgotten. Joseph Sisko, wiping his hands on a towel, approached the table with a warm smile. Gentlemen, everything all right? I thought I'd bring you some gumbo to get you started. I can't do Brock Peters' voice. It's a very deep, McCoy grinned. Perfect timing, Joseph. Mind if we share something with you and everyone here? Joseph raised an eyebrow, curious. What's that? McCoy set the hollow recorder on the table. This is a memorial for a woman named Edith Keeler, a good woman who helped a lot of people, just like you do here. Mind if we let everyone else see? Joseph's face lit up with interest. I think it sounds like something worth sharing. He turned, calling out the room. I don't know why he would have done this. This was a long time ago I wrote this. I don't know why he would let this go on in his restaurant. Everyone quiet down a bit. We've got something special to show you tonight. The patrons settled. Curiosity peaked as McCoy activated the hollow recorder. The restaurant began to fade away, replaced by somber streets of 1930s New York. The street was stark, grainy skies, heavy clouds, a Salvation Army band playing a slow, mournful hymn that echoed against the processions. Their faces etched with grief. At the center of the coffin, of it was the coffin of Edith Keeler, surrounded by wild flowers, simple, unadorned. Data watched, absorbed, as LaGuardia spoke, his voice carrying over the crowd to solemn reverence. Today we say goodbye not only to Edith Keeler, but to the light in our darkest hours. Edith wasn't just a figure in the city, she was its heart, its compassion. She saw us at our lowest and loved us still. She gave us dignity when the world would not. As the words filled the room, Data felt a profound respect take root in him. Feeling of reverence for this woman who had lived not for power but for kindness. People around the restaurant watched with rapt attention, some dabbing their eyes, others nodding as if they understood. The memory was reaching them too. Data turned to McCoy, his eyes filled with a new understanding. Leonard, she was remarkable. Her kindness, her compassion. It's transcended her own life, didn't it? McCoy nodded, his own gaze soft and distant. She lived for others, Data. That's what I wanted you to see tonight. Kindness doesn't leave a mark on history like battles or treaties do, but it leaves a mark on people, and that's a legacy worth remembering. McCoy's voice grew quieter. Data, I lost a friend this year, Data. Someone I thought I'd already lost 78 years ago, but I'll never forget him. And I'll never forget Edith either. I wouldn't have returned to Starfleet all those years, taking up that badge again and again if it wasn't for her voice in my head urging me to serve. Her kindness has kept me going all my life, reminding me of what matters. Data's gaze was intent. This kindness, in a way, is a testament, like stories people share of those with great compassion. As some remember figures like Jesus, the story keeps their spirits alive. Yeah, I said that in Star Trek. McCoy chuckled softly. The truth of it is, Data, that's the truth of it, Data, except it ain't a sermon. It's a prescription, he grinned. I prescribe you a memory, the memory of kindness. It's technically the memory of remembrance. I think this was a Remembrance Day one that I did. Yeah, a long time ago. The projection continued, the slow march of Edith Keeler's funeral fading as others in the restaurant sat in thoughtful silence. Some of them had known loss themselves. Others simply found themselves moved by the story of a woman who had lived quietly but fully. And for Data, the experience was transformative. A history that was no longer confined to facts, but now filled with feeling, memory, and meaning. The projection ended, and the restaurant gradually returned to its usual hum. But there was a change in the room, a quiet sense of reverence that lingered like a memory itself. Joseph Sisko came over, nodding his thanks to McCoy and Data. That was something special. I think Edith Keeler would have loved this place. She'd have liked knowing we're keeping people fed and looked after. Data looked down at the recorder, cradling it gently, quiet awe in his expression. Her kindness created a lasting impact on those around her. A kind of influence that transcends time. That's right, Data, McCoy said. Sometimes it's the smallest things that make the biggest difference. People will help, the compassion we show. That's the real legacy we have to leave behind. Data's voice was soft, thoughtful. As an android, my perspective on Edith Keeler was limited to facts, but now I understand her life was more about her than her actions, or more about her actions. It was about how the love she left behind in others. McCoy smiled, placing a hand on Data's shoulder. That's the lesson, son. It's not about being remembered for what we do, but for how we touch each other's lives. Edith's story, her kindness, is a part of you now. The jazz music drifted back into their awareness. The room filled once more with warmth. As they ate together, each lost in thought. Data understood, perhaps for the first time, the true power of remembrance. The memory of Edith Keeler's life, the compassion she had shown, would be something he would carry into his own journey through the stars. he would remember her. And somewhere in that quiet understanding, surrounded by the love and warmth of the community around him, Data found himself experiencing something close to the feeling of peace. I'm going to cut it off there because this is actually kind of long and we're only halfway done. So I'll see you in the next one.